Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of clinical precision. Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the film and says, there it is. That is the problem.
Right, yeah. It is a very comforting binary.
Yeah.
It's broken or not broken. We
Yeah.
really like our problems to be, highly visible and neatly categorized.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of, say, neurodevelopment or autoimmune diseases, and suddenly that x-ray machine is essentially useless.
Yeah.
You are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky.
Oh, absolutely. The tools don't work the same way.
Right. And that feeling, that sudden chilling realization that the very diagnostic tools you rely on to see the problem might actually be part of your blind spot that is exactly the energy of our deep dive today.
It really is. It's unsettling.
It is. Welcome, everyone. Today we are analyzing a massive stack of 2026 intelligence reports from top units. We are talking Palo Alto Networks Unit 42, IBM X-Force, Group IB, and they all point to one really terrifying conclusion.
Yeah, the paradigm is completely shifted.
Right. We are moving away from the era of the isolated data breach. We have entered an era of what Group IB calls cascading failures of trust.
That phrase right there, cascading failures of trust, that really is the cornerstone of what we are looking at today.
Yeah.
Because we are no longer dealing with a single contained incident, where a hacker breaks into a server and steals a database. We are tracking chain reactions now. Supply chain attacks have become fully industrialized.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because you might be wondering, why should you, the listener, care? Well, whether you're managing a corporate network or allocating venture capital or just relying on digital infrastructure to run your daily life, the very vendors and software partners you trust the most are now the primary attack vectors.
The call is quite literally coming from inside the house.
It really is. Now, before we get into the actual mechanics of how these syndicates are operating, we do want to thank our sponsors for this deep dive, www.cisomarketplace.com and www.breach.company, who really help make this level of analysis possible. So let's start with the paradox at the center of this 2026 security landscape. I was reading through the security scorecard report, and they highlighted this massive disconnect between executive confidence and, well, architectural reality.
Oh, the third-party risk paradox.
Yeah.
The numbers they published are just a perfect illustration of the cognitive dissonance going on in modern corporate governance right now.
It is wild. So 90% of business leaders stated they are confident their organization could survive a major vendor breach. 90%.
Which sounds great until you read the next line.
Right. Because in that exact same survey, 78% of those organizations admit their internal cybersecurity programs cover less than half of their total vendor ecosystem.
Less than half.
I mean, let's just play that out logically. You are essentially blind to 50% of your digital supply chain, yet 90% of you feel secure.
It doesn't make any sense.
It's the equivalent of installing, like, biometric locks on your front door, but then handing out physical master keys to 50 random contractors, landscapers, and delivery drivers, and then sleeping soundly just because your front door is locked.
That is a fantastic analogy, honestly, because it highlights the friction between the chief information security officer and the rest of the business.
Right.
For the last 2 decades, the security industry's primary mandate was building a taller, thicker perimeter. The castle moat.
The big firewall?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But while security teams were busy building those walls, the marketing department, HR, the development teams, they were all busy digitally transforming the business.
Because they need their tools to function, right?
Mm-hmm.
Marketing needs their Zapier integrations.
Right.
HR needs Workday to talk to the payroll API. Developers need open source libraries. I mean, you can't just close the back door without shutting down the entire company's workflow.
Exactly. Every single one of those SaaS applications, those APIs, those managed service providers, they all require a dedicated tunnel straight through your expensive firewall.
Yeah.
So you don't actually have a perimeter anymore, you have a porous membrane. And the attackers looked at this architecture and realized, spending months trying to brute force a next-generation firewall is just a waste of time and resources.
Why scale the wall when the delivery truck has a VIP pass, right?
Precisely.
The Torque report actually anchors this trend by pointing back to the famous Target breach from years ago. That was really the archetype for all this, wasn't it?
It really was the canary in the coal mine.
Because the attackers didn't go after Target's corporate network directly, They compromised the HVAC vendor, the heating and air conditioning company.
Right, because that vendor had network access for billing purposes.
Yeah, so they stole the HVAC credentials, logged in as a trusted partner, and just pivoted directly to the point of sale systems.
And what we are seeing now in 2026 is that HVAC archetype has been weaponized at a global software scale.
Yeah.
Group IB's latest analysis demonstrates that cybercrime has completely decentralized into these specialized ecosystems.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, the attackers don't need to know how to hack your firewall anymore. They can just buy a VIP pass from an initial access broker.
The IABs. Okay, I want to linger on this because the business model is just fascinating. An IAB doesn't care about encrypting your files or stealing your customer data, do they?
Not at all. That's not their department.
Their entire operational model is just walking around the internet, jiggling the digital handles of your third-party vendors, finding an unlocked back door, and then selling that access on the dark web.
Yeah, they are the wholesale suppliers of the cybercrime economy. They harvest compromised vendor credentials, or maybe they exploit zero-day vulnerabilities in edge devices.
And then they just package it up.
Exactly. They will literally list it on a dark web forum, like access to a Fortune 500 healthcare provider via a compromised IT management portal, $15,000.
Wow.
And then a ransomware syndicate buys that access, walks right through the open door, and deploys their payload.
Which perfectly sets up the Trivy and Shai-Hulud 2.0 incident from this past March. I mean, if the target HVAC breach was the physical supply chain archetype, this Trivy incident feels like the ultimate manifestation of a digital supply chain attack.
Oh, without a doubt, it is a masterclass in weaponizing developer trust.
Let's dig into the forensics here, because this is where the good guys' tools were explicitly turned into the weapon.
Right. So between March 19th and March 23rd, the threat group tracked as TeamPCP successfully compromised Aqua Security's Trivy.
And just for context, Trivy is one of the most ubiquitous open-source vulnerability scanners on the market.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's the tool developers embed in their CI/CD pipelines to scan their code for security flaws before pushing it to production.
Which is exactly why TeamPCP targeted it. They didn't want to attack the developers directly. They wanted to compromise the very tool the developers trust to keep them safe.
That is so insidious.
The Unit 42 forensics revealed that TeamPCP actually took over the Aquabot service account. And the mechanism for that takeover, honestly, is a harsh lesson in incident response.
Yeah, the report said they utilized credentials from an older, incompletely remediated incident. Let's break down what incompletely remediated actually means in practice.
Sure.
Does that mean the security team found an intruder, kicked them out of the main server, but just forgot to revoke an API key buried in some configuration file?
That is almost always the exact scenario. When an organization suffers a breach, the immediate pressure from leadership is just to restore operations.
Get the servers back online.
Right. You patch the initial vector, you reset the primary admin passwords, and you declare victory. But highly sophisticated actors like TeamPCP, they establish multiple mechanisms for persistence.
Like what? What are they leaving behind?
They might generate a secondary hidden service account. Or they might issue themselves long-lived OETH tokens. If your forensic team doesn't conduct an exhaustive sweep of the entire identity fabric, you're essentially leaving a dormant key under the mat.
Oh, man.
And TeamPCP simply waited for the heat to die down, walked back in using that forgotten credential, and hijacked the Aquabot account.
And once they had the bot, they deployed the Shai-Hulud 2.0 worm into the NPM ecosystem. Now, we know NPM is the central nervous system for JavaScript development.
It's massive.
But the Unit 42 report outlines this 5-phase attack chain that completely bypasses normal security protocols. They embedded the malicious code in the pre-install phase of the NTM package lifecycle.
Yeah, that was the brilliant part.
Explain why that specific lifecycle hook is so devastating.
It all comes down to the order of operations in a developer's environment. When a developer types the command to install a new package, the package manager fetches the code from the registry.
Okay, standard procedure.
Right. But before the actual software is installed, before the linters run, and crucially, before the security scanners even have a chance to analyze the payload, the package manager executes any scripts defined in the pre-install hook.
Wait, so the payload detonates while the package is still technically being unpacked?
Exactly.
So if the security scanner is supposed to check the ID at the door, the pre-install script is essentially the attacker picking the lock on the back gate, while the security guard is still walking from his car to his post.
That is exactly what happens. It means the whole concept of shifting the industry push to integrate security earlier in the development process is fundamentally bypassed.
Because the attacker got there first.
Yeah, the attacker has shifted even further left than the security tools. By the time Trivy or any other scanner wakes up to look at the code, the Shai-Hulud worm has already executed.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because what the worm actually does is terrifying. It doesn't just look for credit card numbers. Unit 42 details the snowball effect.
The snowball effect is brutal.
Once that pre-install script runs on a developer's laptop or inside a build server, it starts hunting for CI/CD secrets. It scrapes cloud credentials, SSH keys, and crucially, NPM publishing tokens.
And this is how a localized infection becomes a global pandemic. The worm steals the developer's publishing token. That's the digital credential that proves they are allowed to update certain software packages. It exfiltrates that token to an attacker-controlled repository.
Right.
Then, the infrastructure controlled by TeamPCP automatically uses that stolen token to push backdoored updates to any other package that specific compromised developer maintains.
So just to visualize this, if a developer works on a massive open source project used by millions of people, like say Zapier or Postman,
Sure.
but they also maintain a tiny obscure personal project on the side, the attacker compromises the obscure project, steals the token, and then pivots directly into the massive enterprise project.
Yes.
It's just a self-propagating loop.
It's entirely automated propagation.
Mm.
And, we really have to address the accelerator in all of this, which is artificial intelligence.
Oh, right.
Unit 42 reported with moderate confidence that the Shai-Hulud payload was written with the assistance of large language models.
I actually read that detail in the report. They analyzed the bash scripts and found highly specific structural idiosyncrasies and a bizarre use of emojis in the variable strings that heavily correlate with LLM generation.
Yeah, the AI hallucinations leak into the code style.
But what does that actually change for the defenders? I mean, attackers have been writing bash scripts for 30 years. Why does it matter if an AI wrote this one?
It matters entirely because of iteration speed and obfuscation.
Okay, how so?
A human writing a script writes it once. But an LLM can instantly rewrite a malicious payload 1,000 different ways.
Oh.
It changes the structure, the variable names, the obfuscation techniques for every single deployment.
Oh, wow.
Traditional antivirus relies on signatures, right? It looks for a known pattern of malicious code.
Like matching a fingerprint.
Exactly. But if an AI is dynamically rewriting the worm for every single target, there's no static signature to catch. The malware becomes entirely polymorphic.
It's adapting faster than we can catalog it. That is, geez. Just a quick reminder that if you are wrestling with how to secure these incredibly complex software supply chains, this deep dive is brought to you by www.cisomarketplace.com.
They do great work.
They really do. So we've dissected how a digital supply chain attack ravages the software ecosystem. But in 2026, the boundary between digital infrastructure and the physical world has completely evaporated.
There is no boundary anymore.
When you compromise a software update, you aren't just crashing a database, you are stopping physical gears from turning.
Operational technology and information technology have fully converged. You cannot disrupt the digital logistics layer without immediately disrupting physical reality.
Which brings us to the geopolitical landscape, and I want to set a very firm boundary for you, the listeners here.
Yes, very important.
We are strictly parsing the forensic data and the intelligence reports provided by cybersecurity units and government agencies. We are not endorsing any political stance or foreign policy objective here. We are simply looking at how global conflicts are manifesting inside network architecture.
It's an essential distinction to make, because the line between a financially motivated cybercriminal, a hacktivist, and an advanced persistent threat, an APT funded by a nation state, that line is practically non-existent right now.
Right. They are all using the same playbooks. So let's look at the Stryker incident from March 11th, 2026. Stryker is a massive medical technology giant,
Huge footprint.
and a pro-Iranian hacktivist group known as Handala claimed responsibility for a devastating attack on their network, explicitly citing retaliation for a U.S. airstrike.
Right.
But the SWK Technologies report details the mechanism of this attack, and it completely subverts how we usually think about enterprise security.
How so?
Well, they didn't deploy some complex zero-day exploit against a firewall. They compromised administrator credentials and just logged into Microsoft Intune.
Intune. For those who aren't familiar, Intune is a centralized mobile device management platform.
Right.
It's basically the nerve center that an IT department uses to deploy software, enforce security policies, and manage the life cycle of employee laptops, phones, tablets across the globe.
So Handala gets the admin keys, logs into the central command center, and issues a remote wipe command. They literally bricked over 200,000 devices across 79 countries simultaneously.
Just a total scorched earth tactic.
The screens just went black. But I have to push back on the architecture here. I mean, why on earth are 200,000 global medical devices spanning dozens of different operational regions tethered to a single centralized management tenant?
It seems crazy, really.
It does. Doesn't that completely violate the principle of network segmentation?
It absolutely violates the theoretical principle of segmentation, but it perfectly aligns with the economic incentives of enterprise IT.
Okay, explain that.
Managing 79 different regional Intune tenants requires an enormous amount of overhead. You need dedicated staff in every time zone. You have complex synchronization protocols to worry
Well,
about.
that's a cost issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A single centralized tenant is incredibly efficient. A global admin can push a vital security patch to 200,000 machines with a single click.
But efficiency for the defender translates perfectly into efficiency for the attacker. You've essentially built a God mode button.
Precisely. We have engineered single points of catastrophic failure in the name of administrative convenience. If you compromise that central node, the blast radius is total.
Wow.
And this really highlights a terrifying evolution in actor motivations. Historically, a compromised Intune tenant would be used to deploy ransomware.
Right, the goal was financial extortion. You lock it up and ask for money.
But this was a wiper attack.
They didn't even ask for a ransom. They just burn the house down.
Operational destruction was the sole objective. When you deploy a wiper against a medical technology manufacturer, the real-world consequences are immediate. Supply chains for critical surgical equipment just halt.
And this blurring of digital and physical infrastructure is exactly why the hardware supply chain is facing such intense scrutiny right now.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to the FCC. They recently implemented a sweeping ban on the importation of foreign-made routers. They explicitly named manufacturers like Dahua and Kaspersky.
A very aggressive move by the FCC.
Yeah, and this directly correlates with observations from Microsoft and the FBI regarding state-sponsored actors, specifically groups linked to the People's Republic of China, like Volt Typhoon and Storm 0940.
Yes.
But what confused me at first is their target. They aren't launching zero-day attacks against the Pentagon's firewalls. They are attacking the unpatched $50 Wi-Fi router sitting in someone's living room. Why?
It's a brilliant tactical evasion strategy. Yeah. Think about it. If a state-sponsored actor launches an attack from an IP address block known to be associated with foreign intelligence services, the NSA, CISO, and corporate firewalls will instantly block that traffic.
It's too noisy. They see it coming a mile away.
Exactly. It's way too noisy. So they need camouflage.
Domestic camouflage.
Right. They scan the internet for unsecure, consumer-grade edge routers. These are the devices connecting small businesses and residential homes to the broader internet.
The ones you buy at a big box store and forget about.
Yep. These devices rarely receive firmware updates. They often still have default admin passwords like admin, and they sit right on the edge of the network, totally exposed.
Okay.
So Volt Typhoon compromises thousands of these routers and strings them together into a covert operational network, a botnet.
So my living room router is silently drafted into a foreign intelligence botnet.
Yes, exactly. When they want to launch a password spraying attack against a U.S. water treatment facility or a DDoS attack against a logistics hub, they route the malicious traffic through your home router.
Oh, I see.
From the perspective of the water treatment facility's firewall, the attack isn't coming from overseas. It's coming from a residential ISP in Ohio.
It blends in perfectly with normal, benign traffic.
Exactly. The infrastructure of the internet itself is the weapon.
And CISA is scrambling to patch this. They issued Binding Operational Directive 2602, specifically targeting edge devices, trying to force agencies to secure these endpoints.
They are definitely trying to close the gap.
But it feels like this digital fracturing is perfectly mirroring what's happening in the physical supply chain.
Oh, without a doubt.
The Zaneta report details how global shipping logistics are becoming incredibly fragmented. They highlight the routing issues in the Red Sea, which are forcing cargo ships to divert thousands of miles around the Cape of Good Hope.
Right, avoiding the conflict zones entirely.
And the broader China plus one nearshoring strategy?
Yeah, that China plus one strategy is a direct response to geopolitical volatility.
Yeah.
Corporations are trying to de-risk their physical supply chains by moving manufacturing nodes out of China and into regional hubs in places like Mexico, Vietnam, or India.
Which makes sense on paper.
It does. But as the Zaneta data shows, Regionalization destroys the economies of scale that made globalization so profitable in the first place.
You're basically replacing one massive, highly optimized supply chain with five smaller, fragmented, expensive ones.
Exactly.
They are harder to plan, the shipping lanes are more complex, and ironically, they might be more vulnerable to localized disruptions.
It is the physical manifestation of our digital problem.
Hmm.
We built this hyper-connected, hyper-efficient global system predicated entirely on implicit trust.
Yeah.
But the moment that trust evaporates, whether that's due to a physical blockade in a shipping lane or a compromised software library, the efficiency just collapses into chaos.
And the scale of this chaos requires an immense amount of operational bandwidth. I mean, whether a syndicate is wiping 200,000 corporate devices or an ATT is managing a botnet of 50,000 home routers, it takes a massive workforce to coordinate.
It used to take a massive workforce, yes.
Right, but the attackers don't need to hire more human hackers anymore. They have a new operational engine, which brings us to the AI double-edged sword.
Artificial intelligence is the great accelerant of the 2026 threat landscape. It has fundamentally altered the economics of execution for threat actors.
Let's look at the LiteLLM compromise. The record published an analysis showing that TeamPCP, the same group that hit Trivy earlier, managed to poison a widely used AI package called LiteLLM.
A very sophisticated supply chain hit.
And Wiz Research estimated that this single malicious package was present in roughly 36% of all cloud environments.
Over a third.
Over a third of the global cloud infrastructure was exposed to a poisoned AI tool. But how exactly do you poison an AI package? Are they altering the actual code, or are they altering the data the AI learns from?
Well, both vectors are viable, honestly. But altering the training data or the prompt instructions embedded in the package is particularly insidious. This is what we call AI attacking AI.
Right.
The IBM X-Force report noted that 13% of organizations have already suffered breaches of their internal AI models.
So an attacker uses like a prompt injection technique to bypass the AI's safety guardrails, essentially tricking the corporate chatbot into executing malicious commands.
Exactly. And the financial fallout is severe. IBM's data shows that when unauthorized AI use is involved in a breach, it costs the victim organization an average of $670,000 more per incident.
Wow, just add it on top.
Right, because enterprise AI models require vast access to internal data lakes to function properly. If you compromise the AI agent, you inherit its sweeping access to the company's back-end databases, their intellectual property, customer records, everything.
But the real paradigm shift isn't just compromising AI models, is it? It's the attackers using AI to scale human-centric attacks.
That is the real danger, yes.
CyberArk published this staggering statistic. In modern corporate environments, machine identities now outnumber human identities 82-1.
Think about that ratio. For every human employee typing on a keyboard, there are 82 automated scripts, API tokens, and service accounts talking to each other in the background.
And 87% of organizations say that AI-generated deepfakes and hyper-personalized content are making phishing attacks virtually indistinguishable from legitimate communication.
It's nearly impossible to tell what's real anymore.
But the reports from Cobalt and IBM frame this as something much bigger than just a clever phishing email. They call it the agentic shift. I want to really dig into this mechanism.
The agentic shift is the defining characteristic of this era.
Because when I read the Cobalt report, my takeaway was that we aren't just dealing with faster, more efficient scripts, we are dealing with autonomous decision-making. Is that what's allowing these attacks to scale so aggressively?
You've hit on the exact distinction. Historically, a cyber attack, even a really sophisticated one, was a linear, human-driven process.
Okay, walk me through that.
A hacker would run an Nmap scan, read the output on their monitor, decide which vulnerability to exploit, types the specific payload command, and then observe the result.
Very step-by-step.
Right. And if it failed, the human had to sit there, troubleshoot the error, and try a different exploit. It was manual labor.
Human speed work.
Exactly. Human speed. The agentic shift means the threat actor replaces the human operator with an autonomous AI agent.
Oh, wow.
They don't give the AI a list of specific commands. They give it a high-level objective, like infiltrate the billing department of this hospital network and exfiltrate the patient database.
And then the AI just figures it out.
The AI agent takes over completely. It scans the perimeter, reads the architecture, and discovers a vulnerability. It crafts a bespoke spear phishing email targeting a specific billing manager, referencing recent projects it literally just scraped from their LinkedIn profile.
But wait, what if the billing manager has multi-factor authentication enabled? What does the AI do then? Does it just fail?
No, the agent dynamically pivots. It might initiate an automated deepfake audio call to the IT help desk using a synthesized clone of the billing manager's voice.
You are kidding!
It's happening right now. The AI voice claims they lost their phone and needs a temporary MFA bypass token.
That is terrifying.
And once it's inside, if it encounters a firewall rule it didn't expect, it doesn't crash like a static script would. It analyzes the error code, queries its own internal LLM for a workaround, rewrites its own payload on the fly, and tries again.
It's thinking.
It executes the OD loop: observe, orient, decide, act at machine speed 24/7 without ever needing to sleep.
It sounds like defending a network used to be like playing a grueling, hours-long game of chess against a human grandmaster. Now it's like playing speed chess against a supercomputer that's allowed to make 1,000 moves a second, and you only get one.
That analogy perfectly captures the despair many security operations centers are feeling right now, which is exactly why the defense absolutely must integrate AI to survive.
You have to fight fire with fire.
You cannot fight an autonomous agent with a human analyst staring at a Splunk dashboard. It's impossible. The IBM report highlights that organizations employing AI and automation for their cybersecurity reduce the average lifespan of a breach by 80 days.
80 days. That is a massive difference.
And it saves them an average of $1.9 million per incident.
So what's fascinating here is that you have to deploy defensive AI agents to hunt the offensive AI agents. The machines literally have to fight the machines in the background while we just go about our business.
But the defenders are currently losing the speed battle. CrowdStrike's metrics show that 50% of organizations admit they simply cannot respond to AI-driven threats as fast as the attackers execute them.
The infrastructure is just buckling under the speed of these attacks. And while the technology is deeply fascinating, the engine driving this entire ecosystem is profoundly human.
It's always about the money.
It is about money. And speaking of securing your financial assets, we'd like to thank www.breached.company for sponsoring our deep dive today.
A very relevant sponsor for this next segment.
Absolutely, because let's transition into the brutal economics of this crisis. The numbers are staggering. The 2024 IBM report states the global average cost of a data breach hit a record $4.88 million.
It just keeps climbing every year.
And Cybersecurity Ventures projects that global annual ransomware costs will reach an incomprehensible $275 billion by 2031.
At $275 billion, we are no longer discussing a niche criminal enterprise. We're discussing a macroeconomic threat that rivals the GDP of a medium-sized nation.
And the most maddening statistic of all comes from CrowdStrike regarding double extortion.
Oh, double extortion is just ruthless.
For those who might not know, double extortion is when the attacker encrypts your files so you can't use them, but they also steal a copy of the files and threaten to publish them on the dark web if you don't pay.
Right, they hold the data hostage twice.
CrowdStrike found that 93% of victims who pay the ransom in a double extortion attack have their data stolen and leaked anyway.
93%.
And 83% of the people who pay are attacked again. I cannot wrap my head around this business logic. If 93% of companies that pay the ransom still get their data exposed, why is anyone authorizing these multi-million-dollar wire transfers? Is it just pure boardroom panic?
It's a combination of boardroom panic, legal liability, and, honestly, the mechanics of cyber insurance.
How does insurance play into it?
Well, when a hospital or a Fortune 500 company loses access to its data, the operational bleed is catastrophic. They aren't paying for a guarantee. They are paying for the possibility of a decryption key.
Because the alternative is what?
The alternative is rebuilding their entire infrastructure from bare metal, which could take months. Furthermore, they're terrified of the class action lawsuits and regulatory fines that follow a massive data leak. So they pay the ransom, hoping the attackers will honor the agreement and delete the stolen data.
But there's no honor among thieves. It's a protection racket where the mob takes your money and burns your store down anyway.
Exactly. And the reason you get attacked again, that 83% recidivism rate, is because paying the ransom instantly marks you as a lucrative, compliant target on the dark web.
You become a known pair.
Right. The initial access broker who sold the original backdoor just sells it again to a completely different syndicate.
Let's dig deeper into the business model of these syndicates, the cybercrime as a service model. We touched on initial access brokers earlier, but the PKWare report specifically tracked a threat actor known as Zestix, who was selling compromised ShareFile and Nextcloud credentials.
Yes, Zestix is a prime example of an IAB.
How does the pricing actually work in these dark web marketplaces? Do they just have a standard rate sheet?
It operates very much like a legitimate commodities market, actually. The price of access is dictated by the revenue of the target organization and the level of privilege the credentials provide.
Okay.
So a standard employee login for a regional retail chain might sell for $50. But domain admin credentials,
Hmm.
the keys to the kingdom for a multinational manufacturing firm or a major healthcare provider,
What does that go for?
that access can auction for tens of thousands of dollars. Or the IEB might negotiate a percentage of the final ransom payout.
Because the syndicates buying that access know the victim's pain tolerance is incredibly high.
Exactly. They do their financial research.
IBM noted that healthcare breaches are the most expensive, averaging $7.42 million per incident. And the cost isn't just financial. When a hospital's IT infrastructure goes down, machines can't dispense medication, MRI machines go offline, patient histories are inaccessible.
The human cost is very real.
The data clearly shows these attacks lead to longer hospital stays and demonstrably higher mortality rates.
The same brutal economics apply to manufacturing, too. IBM found that for a major manufacturer, unplanned downtime due to a cyber attack costs an average of $125,000 an hour.
An hour?
Right. When you are losing $3 million a day in halted production, a $5 million ransom demand suddenly looks like a rational business decision to a stressed board of directors.
And the most frustrating part is how these attackers are getting in. Mimecast reports that a staggering 95% of all data breaches still involve human error.
It's always the human element.
Someone clicks a bad link, someone reuses a password, someone approves a fraudulent MFA prompt out of sheer fatigue. But KnowBe4 provides a glimmer of hope here. They found that rigorous security awareness training drops phishing risk by 86% after a year.
Training is essential, absolutely, but it's not a structural solution.
Why not?
You cannot build an enterprise architecture that requires 10,000 employees to be flawless 100% of the time, while the AI attacker only needs one employee to make a mistake on a Friday afternoon. It's an unwinnable math problem.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. With costs spiraling into the hundreds of billions, AI agents operating at light speed, and our perimeter defenses completely compromised by third-party vendor access, how do we actually fix this?
The solution requires a massive, painful paradigm shift. It requires bringing down the regulatory hammer on the supply chain and completely re-architecting how we verify trust on a technical level.
Okay, let's start with the regulatory side, because governments are finally realizing that free market incentives just aren't fixing the problem.
They aren't. The market has failed to self-regulate security.
The Aquis Guide details the European Union's Cybersecurity Act, too. And reading through this, it feels radically different from past legislation.
It is a fundamental departure. Historically, cybersecurity regulation was entirely focused on technical checklists. Do you have a firewall? Are your hard drives encrypted? Do you enforce complex passwords?
Right, it was basically just an IT audit.
But the EU Cybersecurity Act 2 introduces the concept of non-technical risk assessments. The regulatory body is no longer just looking at your encryption algorithms. They are evaluating the geopolitical risk of your entire supply chain.
That is a huge shift.
They are analyzing the likelihood that a specific software vendor or hardware manufacturer could be compelled by a foreign intelligence service to introduce a backdoor.
That is massive. It allows the EU to outright ban high-risk vendors from participating in critical sectors like energy, telecom, and healthcare.
And the enforcement mechanism is brutal.
Yeah, the penalties can reach up to 7% of a company's global turnover.
That 7% figure is explicitly designed to elevate supply chain security out of the IT basement and directly into the board of directors' boardroom.
It gets their attention.
It transforms vendor risk from a technical nuisance into a severe, potentially ruinous economic liability. If a bank uses a banned vendor for their cloud infrastructure, they aren't just risking a breach, they are risking a catastrophic fine.
And we are seeing similar aggressive shifts in the United States with CIRCIA. That's the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act.
Yes, CIRCIA is a big deal for U.S. infrastructure.
CIRCIA mandates that critical infrastructure entities have to report substantial cyber incidents to CISA within 72 hours. And if they make a ransom payment, they have to report it within 24 hours.
The entire goal of CIRCIA is situational visibility. The federal government recognizes that supply chain attacks, like the Trivy incident we discussed, cascade exponentially. If a government agency doesn't find out about a compromised vendor for 3 months, the attackers have already used that foothold to compromise 50 downstream power plants or water facilities.
Speed of reporting is the only way to sever the chain reaction.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? The regulators are demanding speed and severe vendor accountability. But how do the technical teams actually implement this?
That's the hard part.
The reports from Torque and Security Scorecard both hammer home the need to abandon static point-in-time audits. I think anyone who works in corporate IT knows the pain of the annual vendor security questionnaire.
Oh, the spreadsheet of doom.
Yeah, a 300-row Excel spreadsheet basically asking a vendor if they use antivirus.
Those questionnaires are a bureaucratic illusion of security. They represent the vendor's posture on a single day of the year.
Right.
Against an AI-driven worm that moves laterally in seconds, an annual Excel spreadsheet is functionally useless. The technical migration is toward automated, continuous, threat-informed defense. And the foundational philosophy of that defense is true zero trust.
Now, we need to be careful here because zero trust is probably the most abused marketing buzzword in the entire industry right now.
It really is. Everyone slaps a zero trust label on their product.
Every vendor claims they sell a zero trust firewall. What does true zero trust actually mean when we are talking about surviving a supply chain attack? Let's walk through a literal scenario. Under the old perimeter model, if an employee or a vendor logs in, what happens?
Under the old model, the castle and moat, once you authenticate with your username and password, the system assumes you are trusted.
You are inside the castle.
Right. You can walk the hallways, open different doors, and access the file shares because your initial login verified your identity.
And under a continuous zero trust architecture.
Under true zero trust, the system assumes that the network is always hostile and that every identity is potentially compromised at all times. It operates on the principle of never trust, always verify.
Okay, so how does that look in practice?
So you log in. The system doesn't just check your password. It checks the cryptographic posture of your specific laptop. It checks your geolocation. Are you logging in from your usual home in Chicago or from an IP address in Eastern Europe?
Right.
It analyzes behavioral biometrics. Are you typing at your usual speed?
And it doesn't just do this once at 8:00 a.m.
Exactly. The authentication is continuous. Every time you try to access a new application or query a database, the system reevaluates your trust score in real time.
Wow.
But the most crucial element for supply chain defense is microsegmentation. Let's go back to the Trivy scanner incident.
Okay.
A legacy system trusts the Trivy update because it carries the correct digital signature from Aqua Security. True Zero Trust says, I see the valid signature, but I am still going to heavily restrict what this software is allowed to do.
I see.
If the vulnerability scanner suddenly attempts to open an outbound connection to an unknown IP address to exfiltrate your CI/CD secrets, the Zero Trust policy instantly blocks the connection.
Because a scanner has no legitimate business behavior that requires exporting credentials to a random IP.
Exactly. Trust the signature, but rigorously verify the behavior.
And the Torque report takes this a step further with the concept of the kill switch. They emphasize that when a vendor is breached, you cannot rely on human workflows.
Humans are too slow.
If you get an alert that your payroll vendor is compromised, you can't just submit an IT ticket, wait for a firewall engineer to read it, get approval from a manager, and then implement a block rule 3 days later.
Time is your absolute enemy in a cascading failure. Torque advocates for automated orchestration playbooks. The kill switch is an automated sequence.
How fast are we talking?
The second anomalous behavior is detected from a third-party connection. The system automatically executes a predefined script. It revokes the vendor's API keys, severs their VPN tunnel, and isolates any internal servers they recently communicated with.
It stops the bleeding in milliseconds.
Without waiting for human intervention, yes.
So if you are running a business or even just managing your own digital life, you can't just set up a firewall and forget it. You have to assume the breach has already happened upstream.
You have to.
You have to assume that the software update you are downloading right now from a vendor you trust implicitly is compromised. And you must design your architecture, your permissions, and your incident response plans to survive that reality.
The era of the hardened perimeter is over. Blind trust is now your most critical vulnerability. Architectural resilience, the ability to operate while under active compromise, is the only metric that matters in 2026.
We have covered an immense landscape today. We started with the Shai-Hulud worm infiltrating NPM packages, proving that our security tools can be turned into weapons.
A rude awakening for developers.
We analyzed how geopolitical tensions are fueling destructive wiper attacks that brick medical equipment and weaponize home routers. We examined the agentic shift, where AI has moved us from human speed hacking to autonomous machine speed warfare.
And we unpacked how governments and technologists are desperately trying to build continuous, zero-trust resilience into the supply chain.
It is a dense and volatile environment, but understanding the precise mechanics of how these trust networks fail is the vital first step toward designing systems that can actually withstand the pressure.
Absolutely.
I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to process, and I'm going to tee you up for this because this concept you brought up earlier really stuck with me.
Well, when you zoom out and look at the macro architecture, we have spent the last 30 years building a global digital economy that is entirely predicated on trust.
Right.
We share open source code libraries globally. We rely on managed service providers across different continents. We trust hardware manufactured in entirely different geopolitical spheres.
It's all connected.
But as the EU Cybersecurity Act 2 and the relentless exploitation of edge routers show us, that borderless trust is now our fatal flaw. The provocative question for you to mull over is this. As nations begin to ban foreign routers and mandate strict supply chain borders, are we witnessing the end of the open global internet? Are we moving toward a splinternet where digital borders perfectly mirror geopolitical ones, fundamentally changing how software and hardware are built forever?
That is a profoundly heavy thought. The diagnostic X-ray machine is broken, and the murky waters of our digital supply chain are only getting deeper. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And a final huge thank you to our sponsors, www.cisomarketplace.com and www.breach.company, for making this level of analysis possible. Keep questioning your sources, continually examine your blind spots, and above all, stay curious. Catch you next time.